Hello and welcome. I'm Brett Theodos, Senior Fellow and Director of the Community Economic Development Hub at the Urban Institute. So glad that you could join us for this webinar. We're going to be talking about innovations in small business support and early implementation of the State Small Business Credit Initiative, or SSBCI. This is SSBCI 2.0. We had 1.0. We'll be discussing some of the lessons from the first round. But this second round was included in the American Rescue Plan, signed into law in spring 2021. And Treasury and the states have spent much of the past year crafting rules and strategies to help this truly significant infusion of capital into the small business space be spent productively, wisely, and with maximum impact. So we're going to have a conversation today about how to do that, what states can do, and how the program can and should be best designed and implemented to generate the most significant and lasting impact for communities that need it. We have a couple of housekeeping things that we're going to get through, and then we've got a level setting presentation on SSBCI 2.0, and then a panel of experts who are at work on the front lines designing and implementing this program. So let's start with just a couple of notes as you are getting going. First, this event is recorded, and the recording will be posted online on the same event page where the event is listed. Give us a day or two to get that up, but you will find it there and you can share it with your networks and watch any parts that you missed. There is a hide captions button or show captions button at the bottom, the live transcript, where you can adjust your accessibility features if you'd like to see or not see captioning. We will have slides that Rachel is going to be presenting available on the same event page on urban.org. All participants are muted for the duration of the webinar. So you're going to be hearing from the panelists, but we do want to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A box at any time during the presentation. You won't have the chat function enabled, but please do make good use of the Q&A function. And our hope is that you'd be willing to take a minute at the end and complete a survey about the event so we can get any feedback about what you have enjoyed and what you would like to see us do the next time we revisit a topic related to this. So with that, I'm going to transition us to the first step in this event, which is a presentation. We're going to be hearing from Rachel Riley, founder of ACES and Archers, a strategic advisory and consulting firm that focuses on economic and community development. And she's been at the leading edge of informing SSBCI as it rolls out and working with partners. So Rachel, so glad to have you, and passing it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brett. And thank you, Urban, for having me and also for hosting this really important conversation at what I think is a pivotal moment in this program. Just as a little bit of context, as Brett mentioned, I am a founder of an advisory firm, and one of my clients is the Council of Development Finance Agencies. I've been leading their State Small Business Credit Initiative work since it was reauthorized last year. And that is, I'll put a link in the chat after I'm done with my comments, but they really have provided a hub of resources for this program if folks are interested in learning more. So just a little bit of context setting on SSBCI. This is a $10 billion small business financing and technical assistance program that is administered by Treasury. It's administered by Treasury, but deployed through states, territories, tribal governments, and Washington, D.C. So I collectively call them our local governments. And it's a program that, as I mentioned, was reauthorized last year. It was originally authorized in 2010 for a 7-year period. And it was very successful in leveraging private capital alongside public dollars, even through the program sunset in 2017. And so a lot of the programs that were launched in 2010 by local governments are still in place and are still serving small businesses. And I think it really is a testament to the program design and strategy and how states and other local governments really utilize this program back in 2010 through 2017. Again, a little bit more context setting. There are really 5 approved programs that you can tailor small business financing around. And of course, financial intermediaries are key partners to these local governments in getting money out the door. And financial intermediaries can mean, traditional banks, regional banks, community development financial institutions are a critical partner in 1.0 and will continue to be a critical partner in 2.0. That's how we're currently referring to SSBCI right now. And we're also seeing a number of mission-oriented fund managers. So that could be lenders or equity investors come to the table to support these 5 approved programs, which are the Capital Access Program, which offers a small loan loss reserve, the Collateral Support Program, which basically provides cash to address collateral gaps, loan participation programs, loan guarantee programs, and venture capital programs. 500 million of this $10 billion package was peeled off to fund technical assistance programs, and the remainder of the funding will be deployed to these local governments through a formula allocation. And the local governments really have a mandate this time around to serve historically disadvantaged and businesses and micro enterprises. So that's important to note during the conversation. So here we are, more than a year after the program was reauthorized, and we're at various stages of program application and approval process. And so thank you for advancing the slide. I wanted to provide a quick overview of where we are, highlight key program benchmarks over the next couple of years, and then also quickly flag some unique features of SSBCI that position it to be very different from traditional small business relief or financing programs like what we saw with PPP or other SBA programs. So I won't go too deep into this timeline, really just meant to be informational for you. We are at the process where states and territories and Washington, D.C., they all 56 of them submitted capital program applications back in February. Treasury is reviewing those applications, has approved a few of those applications, and will continue to do so on a rolling basis. Treasury also recently issued information around the technical assistance grant program, so guidelines for that. States, territories, DC, and tribal governments all have a September 1st deadline for submitting technical assistance grant program applications. So we'll see money continue to trickle out basically from now through probably the beginning of next year. And we can go to the next slide. Just to show kind of a longer forward-looking timeline. I think we're now getting through the regulatory process or regulatory period. There's a lot of new guidelines and guidance issued. There's an FAQ document issued yesterday, so Treasury's still at work there. But as I mentioned, this February through September 2022 timeline has really been the application period for these local governments to submit their proposed strategies for the capital programs as well as the technical assistance programs. We should see tranche 1 of the capital program funding go out the door between now and spring of 2023, just so folks know. Even though this is formula allocated dollars, for the most part, Treasury will deploy tranches of funding. So it's 3 tranches of equal proportion, and states will have, or local governments will have 3 years to spend down the first tranche, and then another 3 years to spend down the second tranche before they can access that final tranche. So this is, a program with a long tail. The dollars don't have to be immediately deployed, but they do have to meet these benchmarks for deployment over a 3-year period. And then the final thing I'll say, which I think, no, we can go to the next slide, thank you. Just some notable program features and strategies. So the technical assistance piece, technical assistance services are only available to these very small businesses or micro enterprises, as well as socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. So businesses that are led or controlled by SETI individuals or SETI businesses. And so the local governments that are putting together technical assistance strategies really have to demonstrate how their programs, their TA programs, are going to serve those constituencies. Treasury also decided to assign $100 million to the Minority Business Development Agency. So MBDA will be providing technical assistance services. I think this could be a real game changer, especially as you think through MBDA has advanced manufacturing programs and sites, and how can we be leveraging up SSBCI technical assistance money to expand opportunity and access for minority businesses that are specializing in advanced manufacturing as that field continues to grow. SSBCI 2.0 has assigned dollars to tribal governments to lead financing programs and technical assistance programs, and those applications are due in September. They've been working really hard. We're seeing some consortium models between multiple tribal governments, and I'm really excited to see what folks propose there. Really notably, venture capital programs. This is kind of the program to fund state-sponsored venture capital programs. 48 of the 56 local governments have proposed to do at least one VC program, so keep an eye out on that. And also we're seeing folks get really creative around how to use SSBCI to fund employee ownership strategies, especially as the silver tsunami is coming to the shore. I don't know how else, in anticipation of the silver tsunami. And also, how are we using this money to support strategies around growing emerging industries like clean and renewable energy. With that, I will turn it back over to Brett with just a reminder that CDFA is working with our SSBCI coalition on all of these issues, as well as issuing new resources and hosting events. So I'll drop a link in the chat, but please join us anytime. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks so much, Rachel. That was great level setting. If you have questions that are in the weeds about SSBCI and implementation timelines or structures or even resources, please put them in the Q&A and Rachel will be able to jump in. But I want to turn now to our esteemed panelists. If you guys could step up to the camera. So very quick way of introduction. We have with us Beth Bafford, who is VP of Syndications and Strategy at Calvert Impact Capital. We have Ballou, VP Impact Finance at JPMorgan Chase & Co. We have Rafael Salaberrios, Senior VP for Small Business Capital Access at Empire State Development. And we have Scott Wu, who is Executive Director at iBank in California. So excited to have you all join us today. So appreciative of your taking time. And we've got some questions we're going to work through, as well as get to the audience questions. So where I want to start is, we heard some ways that SSBCI 2.0 is delimited, but also there are some ways that really mean some design features that really mean that you in states have options in how you are going to structure SSBCI. And there are a lot of needs out there among small businesses and the groups who are supporting them. So I'd love to hear from perhaps starting out in the California context, what are your top priorities? What do you think and recommend that other people consider? What's the experience that you can draw in from SSBCI 1.0 that you want to adapt, modify, redo for 2.0? So Scott, let's start with you, and then we'll go to the New York experience to Rafael.
Thanks, Brett, for having me here today on this panel. It's a real pleasure. It's easy for us in California when we're thinking about the priorities of this program, because iBank's priorities are very much aligned with that of SSBCI. iBank is California's infrastructure and economic development bank. We're the state's only general purpose financing authority, and we house the state's Small Business Finance Center, as well as the state's climate fund. Our mission is to promote jobs, economic activity, and quality of life for all Californians. And our current priorities at iBank are to emphasize disadvantaged communities and underserved communities, as well as include climate considerations in all of our activities. And so this fits perfectly within the goals and the mandate of SSBCI. At iBank, we see our necessity and requirements to fill gaps in the private capital markets, to fill gaps in any federal programming that may be available for constituents. We think that in this program, it's important, as Rachel said, there's a long tail to SSBCI. We see it as a permanent tail. We see this investment as one-time capital to create permanent infrastructure, permanent sustainable infrastructure that will be available for all small businesses in California for the duration and well into the future as the funds continue to recycle and get redeployed. And so we intend to basically turbocharge our 3 SSBCI 1.0 programs, launch a venture capital program, and consider some new programming as well. You mentioned SSBCI 1.0. I'm going to just take a minute to talk about what we were able to accomplish with the $168 million the state of California received from 1.0. iBank worked with the state treasurer's office in collaboration in our loan loss reserve CalCap program. We served nearly 10,000 businesses with over $400 million. In our collateral support program, we supported over we used $65 million to support over $300 million. In our small business loan guarantee program, we used the $84 million that was allocated to support over $650 million of loans for over $1 billion of financing activity, in total over 100,000 jobs. And so 1.0 went very well for California. We did nearly half of the nation's SSBCI loans and helped create or retain nearly 40% of the nation's jobs that were created as part of the program. And importantly, 62% of that went to women-owned or minority-owned small businesses, which was the highest in the nation. And our loans via the CDFI community, or the mission-driven lenders, was also amongst the highest in the nation. And we intend to do even better this time around.
Raphael, let's go to you. How do you decide among all the priorities that are present in New York? What is the one that gets the resource?
Well, Beth, thank you. First, thank you for having me on the panel. I'm very happy and honored to be on the panel. Thank you for calling me esteemed. I don't get called that often, so I'll take it. I'll take it. Well, we look at the priorities in New York State. I work for Empire State Development, which is the economic development agency for New York State. So we work directly for the governor's office, and we follow the governor's lead insofar as where we want to put our priorities. And thankfully for us, the SSBCI funds are directly linked to what we want to do, really, which really helps small businesses, micro businesses, businesses located in disadvantaged communities. So we focus our programs specifically on those communities, right? When you think about our capital, we actually have the capital access program. We are looking now, because New York State, there's so much going on as far as development is concerned. We want to make sure that we started a program that's going to help them MW contractors, the SETI contractors that need bonding assistance, that need working capital. So we actually have a program, we're proposing a program that will allow us to help these small contractors get access to these contracts. Many times you will win a contract, but the deal is, where do I get the money to fund the contract? Right, and we know banks. So I love banks. I'm a former banker, but I don't think helping small contractors get access to capital is something that banks have as a priority. So we're trying to fill that niche there and making sure that if you have a contract in New York State will help you fund that contract and help you carry the process through. We also understand that there are small businesses that want to grow, purchase buildings, such renovate buildings. So we have a program set up. We're proposing a program that will allocate dollars directly for that in partnership with banks, similar to the SBA's 504. So we look at the 504 model. I think what we're doing, though, is actually making it much more cost effective for New York State small businesses, so that if they are in the process of looking to renovate a building, buy a building, purchase machinery and equipment as they look to grow, we want to make sure that we offer them capital that's very cost effective, terms and conditions that are palatable to them. And what we're trying to do is get rid of the bureaucracy. Right. The idea we want in New York State, if you are a small business in New York State, we want to help you. We want to minimize the hoops that these small businesses have to jump through. And we're using the low cost capital of SSBCI to help obtain that mission. And our overall mission, again, is just to help small businesses grow. From every part of the state, what I look to do is make sure we go around every part. I'm from the Bronx, which is in New York City. And so I found out that, in the small businesses in the Bronx have the same needs as businesses in Chautauqua County, which is in the western part of New York State. So we want to make sure that we focus our efforts and do it statewide on a statewide basis.
That's great. Beth and Caleb, I want to come to you with the next question, and everybody in the audience, if you would take a minute to think through what questions you want to throw into the mix. But where we would like to go next for Beth and for Caleb really gets to the goals of what SSBCI is trying to accomplish. And there are tensions in the program present in many programs that we see out of the federal government, as well as philanthropy, as well as state and local government, about scale or breadth and depth of impact. And that can manifest itself in some very specific requirements, like 10-to-1 leverage requirements, which might mean bringing in a lot of market rate capital, perhaps, and therefore not being able to have as deep a risk profile. And that might have an effect on depth of impact in terms of what businesses were able to reach. But also in SSBCI 2.0, we see very clear goals and strategies and targets around very small businesses, around socially and economically disadvantaged businesses, individuals owning those businesses. So how do we reconcile the tension between scale, leverage, and depth of impact and the subsidy that might need to go along to support that? Can SSBI take sufficient risk to really meet entrepreneurs with greater risk profiles, or is one tool can't do all things? Is this a tool for a very specific thing? So Beth, if you want to kick us off on where you see SSBCI able to fit within the small business ecosystem space in terms of the products it's offered, and Caleb, will go to you next.
Awesome. Yeah. And thanks so much, Brett, for pulling this together. So, I mean, I think that's the biggest question and the biggest kind of question and concern for folks as we think about SSBCI. Essentially, the legislation has asked for three things. It asked for pretty high private leverage, that 10-to-1 leverage ratio, private capital at risk in every transaction, and reach into businesses that are either socially and economically disadvantaged or very small businesses, most of which are inherently kind of un or underserved by the existing financial system. And so pulling those three things together is pretty difficult, right? Threading that needle is pretty difficult because if for folks who, for the businesses that we intend to serve, which is the very small businesses and the steady businesses, there's a reason that they're not served today. There's a reason they're not served by the traditional markets. There's a reason the capital is not flowing efficiently to meet their needs. And so there is a part of the market that's broken. And there's many reasons for that: distribution, cost, reach, customer acquisition, real and perceived risk. And so really trying to make sure that we are leveraging government subsidy, all of our taxpayer dollars, to reach and fix those broken links in the market is what this program is intended to do. And the way in which the leverage requirements and the private capital at risk requirements don't make that easy. And so that's really what we've been trying to think about is how do we take what we know about what the capital markets are looking for? How do we look at those broken links in the market, and how do we create the right financial structure to meet all of those legislative and kind of policy agendas? And I think at the end of the day, like we just need to be honest that serving these populations does take risk, and we have a moment in time to prove and to kind of reduce the difference between perceived risk and actual risk in serving these populations. And so as much as we can do to help leverage these SSBCI dollars to really build the data, build the track record, build the case, build a better understanding about what reaching these businesses at scale looks like, I think we'll come out with a much stronger marketplace going forward. So that's really what we've been focused on.
Terrific. Thank you for lifting up those tensions and how you're threading them. Caleb, where do you come in on this?
Where do I stand? Well, first of all, so I work on a team within JPMorgan called Impact Finance that actually allocates, it's sort of the impact investing arm of JPMorgan, allocates flexible capital, impact prioritizing capital, and actually sits under global philanthropy, but invests balance sheet capital and kind of plays that bridge between grant-like capital and, of course, the commercial capital that our lines of business allocate and help underwrite and arrange. We allocate capital aligned with the bank's philanthropic priorities, many of which are in inclusive growth, and a lot of the themes around small business, for example, and jobs and financial health, and as well as affordable housing that you'll see in the SSBCI. And this question of leverage and of being as efficient as possible with sources of this flexible capital is something that we wrestle with all the time. And I should be clear, from the outset that I'm not the technical expert on SSBCI that my co-panelists are, but very much what we try to do is to partner with folks like these panelists on the products that they are constantly developing, and the different strategies and what they're trying to bring to the market, which is constantly trying to thread the needle and all of these different tensions between engaging private sector capital and providing the right sort of leverage, and also serving the beneficiaries and the underserved that we're all trying to reach. I would definitely highlight when you have an influx of capital at this size, some of these risks and these dynamics in the market, as Beth said, are not going to change, right? Some of the things around operating costs and the actual risks of serving some of these businesses, but some of them are perceived risks, and others are because the markets that serve a lot of these segments are just simply not as efficient and not as big. And something like the SSBCI is really an opportunity, I think, to innovate and to test new models and to try to come up with ways that at least can begin to engage more diverse investors in different sorts of ways, to bring more investors into this space, to get them more comfortable, to think about things like liquidity. I suspect we'll talk about a little bit later. And I think it's wonderful how to have this degree of influx of capital focused on this. I think one of the challenges here is the timeline, which is pretty lengthy in terms of how the states can deploy this capital, but actually very, very tight in terms of the federal deadline for some of the states. And when you think about engaging at a very large scale, potentially coordinating across states, potentially coming up with these the scale of different sorts of structures that can engage private capital, it's a pretty tight timeline for folks like those on this call to come up with the options to do that. And I think we have some good options, but I think that is a tension. And I think there's also tension between trying to see the innovation that you need for some of these long-term structures and trying to get that near-term leverage. And there's a little bit of conflicted I don't know, direction within SSBCI on that, where you can have instruments like loan guarantees and different sorts of subsidies that can provide direct subsidy to private capital and bring it in to finance small businesses that are underserved, but maybe that's not providing the pathway to a more innovative and efficient long-term way of engaging those investors. Likewise, some of the more high risk or innovative vehicles of doing this may not be as effective at that near-term leverage. And I think that has been one of the challenges of navigating, and one of the things that perhaps these types of programs and the federal government should continue to sort of track and learn and continue that dialogue.
That's great. Thanks. Scott, Raphael, anything you want to add on this, how you're navigating this? Or otherwise, we're going to go to secondary market developments.
Well, I agree with both comments in that there are some challenges the way the SSBCI structure has been set up. We're taking those challenges and making sure that we try to work within the structure of SSBCI, because at the end of the day, the key is to get the money into the hands of the small businesses that really need it. And so making sure that we understand what the guidelines are and making sure that we take the guidelines and make them fit to New York State, right? So, you know, when Caleb was talking about co-investing and actually guaranteeing loans and such, we look at that and say, okay, how do we help like the CDFI world, which are our partners, the CDFI world, we want to make sure that we incentivize them to take risk, right? Take more risk. And obviously it is taxpayer money, but the money is supposed to be put at risk. So what we're doing is designing programs that would help in credit enhance and making sure the CDFIs, the credit unions in New York State, the minority depository institutions get the assistance they need to take that risk that we need so that these businesses can grow and continue to thrive, especially during these challenging times that we find ourselves in.
Okay, let's go next to secondary market. And what I'd love to hear is your insights into how SSBCI is spurring developments in the small business lending secondary market, which historically, apart from SBA guarantees, has been lacking. So what do you see as emerging and what is still needed? Caleb, do you want to start on that? And then we'll go over to Beth.
Sure, I'll provide my thoughts, and then I'm actually going to talk about something that Beth is working on, so she can probably correct all of the many ways in which I mischaracterize it. But you know, for banks, I think secondary markets are obviously something near and dear to the heart of someone like JPMorgan, and particularly to a team like mine that sits within, you know, kind of between the philanthropic activities and the lines of business, and would love to kind of make some more of those connections. And you know, one thing I think that gets us very excited, but has been, you know, definitely tough to date, is actually securitization of things like CDFI, small business assets, and you know, I think CDFIs, the importance of CDFIs, the critical role that they play in development infrastructure in small businesses within the U.S. has been clear throughout COVID. There's also been unprecedented level of support, and I think that combined with now the SSBCI providing an opportunity to sort of build on this in the recovery context and think about building, you know, that more durable infrastructure and taking it forward, is a really interesting context and opportunity here. And you know, an example of that is something that Beth, that Calvert, that LISC as well are working on, which is actually a vehicle to pool CDFI small business assets at the level of multiple states in warehouse facilities that are blended facilities, a mix of private capital, some development capital, some SSBCI capital, and then ultimately to season those and to securitize assets that are fit for securitization, and to continue to dimension out the risk of these different assets and how they, you know, this sort of strategy could be used in the future and what degree of subsidy might be needed, and to bring, you know, more diverse investors into this space. And I think that is a really important concept and a very good use of SSBCI capital in terms of the innovation there, testing out a structure, testing, you know, the risk profile of these assets, bringing in new investors. All of this, I think, is very important in terms of more efficient secondary markets, and particularly when you think of securitization. You know, but a few sort of observations on this that I think are maybe a little bit revealing. And one of them is, you know, so the allocation of SSBCI, you know, one thing that they're looking for that I think has been touched on previously is kind of meaningful capital at risk at all levels. And, you know, what had been proposed originally was that these facilities at the state level purchase small business loans originated by CDFIs that are eligible within the set out parameters. And the CDFIs would retain 5% of these and sell the remaining 95% to these warehouses, which would seem and then ultimately hopefully securitize those. And per the guidance of the federal government, the SSBCI program, that actually shifted to 20% so that the CDFIs would have meaningful capital at risk. And obviously that de-risks the warehouse facilities. It actually de-risks perhaps the private investors here, but it does make it a little bit harder for some, particularly perhaps the less well capitalized, the smaller CDFIs, perhaps those particularly serving some of the hardest to reach segments. And what's interesting there is that wasn't actually a private sector ask, right? That was actually an SSBCI ask, which I think is interesting. I also think what's interesting about this concept is that it provides that near-term leverage in terms of these state-level facilities and having a blend of private capital and SSBCI funding and the originating CDFIs. It has that near-term leverage, but it also has this innovation, kind of long-term angle. And only to mention that it's great that it does, but that's a rare thing. And it's hard sometimes to combine those and sort of thinking critically about how do we seed innovation in the long term while also being focused on leverage in the short term, I think is just an enduring question. And then finally, in order to get the scale for something like securitization, going across multiple states is really advantageous. And that coordination, I think, is critical to this. But it also meant that they had, an extremely narrow timeline to try to coordinate enough states and get this thing, at least mostly together and get these applications in. And that's a lot of coordination. And it's great that Calvert and LISC seem to be doing very well on that front. But how many organizations are really set up to be able to coordinate something like that? Again, maybe just another challenge that we're seeing. But I think that kind of highlights some of it. So maybe the timeline's a little problematic. Maybe there should be continued conversation between the private sector and between SSBCI. I think that dialogue is always helpful and the relevant agencies and this kind of near and long-term leverage definition. But we're lucky that we do have innovators like the folks on this call to help us think through this. And JPMorgan would love to continue to kind of make that connection and help seed these facilities and also maybe bring in lines of business to help bring them to scale.
Thanks, Caleb. Beth.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think in our minds, kind of the secondary markets are almost, so if we want to be serving steady and very small businesses, and we think CDFIs and CDFI loan funds are a critical distribution channel to serve those businesses, we expect and hope to get $100 billion of activity through, obviously not all of that's going through CDFIs, but a lot of activity through relatively small pipes. We always have to use the secondary markets, right? It is not feasible to think about that scale through kind of the existing balance sheet and kind of an infrastructure in a near-term timeframe without an equal injection of equity onto balance sheets. And so, we have been working with and structuring recovery funds, which are basically loan purchase facilities with our friends in New York, our friends in California, and our friends in other states. And what we have been able to do that, we've done about 250 million in volume in the last 18 months across those programs, but trying to do that without an active kind of without a facility that has liquidity, and to do that at a larger scale over a longer period of time. We have largely relied on CRA motivated banks, foundations, family offices, those who are really keen to support small businesses throughout the pandemic. But that money is not big enough, right? That pot of money is not big enough to sustain this activity over a long period of time. And B, to be honest, like a lot of people aren't as focused on small businesses anymore now that kind of pandemic has moved on and there's other challenges and issues to address. And so if we really want to serve these populations, do it with and through a group of community-based lenders and bring in the scale of private capital that we need to meet the leverage requirements and the kind of private capital match requirements of this program, we have to activate kind of traditional financial tools to do it. And one of the most the most efficient way to finance cash flowing assets is through a securitization. And so that's what we're helping to structure in partnership with 30, 40, maybe 50 or more CDFIs across the country in different states that are interested in participating, so that we can basically centralize the private capital function and make that more streamlined, and then keep the distribution, the lending, the loan product, the players, the technical assistance, keep all of that local, which is how it operates today and how it should be.
Right, if I could reinforce that comment, because from our vantage point, I think it's underappreciated how important the secondary markets are, right? The general population here is secondary market securitizations. They, their eyes roll, and then they think about the collapses of the CLO markets or the CDS markets of 2008. But what it really means is more liquidity. What it means is more access to capital, more access to more capital, which means lower cost of funds, which is passed through to the small businesses. It increases throughput, increases velocity of loans. And so at the end of the day, the greater access to capital you have in the secondary markets, the better it is for all parties. It becomes a more mainstream product, easier to finance. And right now there's a limited amount of capital available for the small business community, which is what we're all engaged here in trying to increase and drive. It's challenging though. This is a difficult market to create the secondary markets in. We've been engaged on this. We'll continue to look for ideas and explore new avenues. We've worked with Beth and Calvert on a couple of vehicles here in California for the California Rebuilding Fund. And we'll continue to try to do more because it's important.
Thank you. And I think that is it's helpful for the audience to get a sense of both the process of how you are assembling this and the potential impact. I want to turn, there's been a lot of energy and attention on debt lending, but I want to talk about equity finance investing. We at Urban have been documenting some international models to expand VC, and there are efforts in the US, like EDA's Build to Scale program. There are CDFIs like Community Development Venture Capital Alliance. SSBCI 1.0 was a big support for VC in some states that moved forward in that. And then there's this backdrop of incredible geographic and sectoral concentration of existing VC investment. An abysmal 2% of VC dollars go to women-owned firms and 2% to Black or Latino-owned firms. So I'd love to hear about your plans for VC in SSBCI 2.0 and how you think it can be used as a tool to broaden who receives equity finance, to include what kind of return profiles are you looking for, or whether you think it's more important to invest in fund managers and help them get started while they're trying to raise a fund, or is it more important to be providing actual investment capital into those funds? So Raphael, can we start with you on your thoughts about VC, and then Scott will go over to you next.
Sure. So our venture program actually is being run by one of my colleagues, and she's not on the call, so I'll do my best to imitate her. I think what's key to us, and I think you brought up the important issue, it is, the venture capital market, it seems to be leaving the minority and women-owned businesses behind. Right? It's difficult now. Historically, it's been difficult for a Black-owned firm or Latino-owned firm to actually go out and get venture capital. The statistics show it, and I'm not really speaking out of turn by saying that. So what we're looking to do is really help with investing with finding emerging managers. I think one of the key components we're focusing on is trying to get managers who look like the folks they want to invest the money with. Right? Because it makes it so much easier for the investee when they go to someone and see someone looks like them, and they get a sense, this person knows I'm going through, this person has some synergy with what I'm trying to deal with. So we're looking at working with angel groups, investors in crowdfunding, in our community. We are proposing a community and regional partner program, right? Where we're going to have a matching program. So we're looking to work with these angel groups and investors in crowdfunding programs so that we are targeting that market. We have a direct investment fund, obviously, and we're going to continue to do direct investment, but a lot of our focus is going to be on our partners, similar to what we do with the CDFI and the debt side. So what we're looking to do is a same model, CDFI type organizations, accelerators, and as such, emerging and regional managers, multi-fund programs, so that our money gets invested co-side with them, or we're actually giving the money to, or lending the money to them, investing the money for them, so that the target audience that we're trying to reach, the SETI-owned business, feels that New York State is actually living up to the promise of helping them every way they can with accessing capital. I mean, many times we look at accessing capital only from the debt side, right? We're proposing a similar process with venture, so that we're making venture a lot more palatable to the individual business owner, to show, look, maybe debt doesn't work for you, especially if you're a startup. It's going to be hard for you to get a startup loan from a bank or traditional lenders. We'll have venture that may be able to help you. We're working this idea of having patient capital, so that, you know, we know that if you borrow money from a bank or from a CDFI, you're supposed to pay right away, right? So what we're looking to do is say, oh, okay, let's start some kind of patient capital, which is really starting to take hold in the country, where we're lending the money out, investing the money, and say, okay, we're going to give you a little time to start up, to rev up, before we expect our return on principal. So those are some of the things we're looking at. I think the venture capital world in New York State is going to be pleasantly surprised about what we're doing. And I think we're going to increase the access to venture capital by focusing on these emerging managers, focusing on partners, and not relying just on New York State to make a decision, but really look to more organizations that have the boots on the ground and provide them with the capital and let them make the investment decisions to help get this capital out to the SETI-owned businesses, which is everyone's focus, SETI-owned businesses.
Yeah, Brett, for California, you know, in SSBCI 1.0, the state chose not to use any of those funds for a venture capital program, and in partly because California is the global headquarters of venture capital. So the notion that we need to have more capital deployed into the California venture capital market is somewhat of an interesting notion. Having said that, despite the diversity of the state of California, even in the state, it's highly concentrated, both demographically and geographically. Over 90% of venture capital in California flows to 3 areas: Bay Area, San Diego, and LA. The rest of the state sees very little, if any. And even in California, the investment professionals are largely white and male. And so what we wanted to do is use the money this time around, and we plan to start with $200 million of the $1.2 billion SSBCI allocation to California to launch a state venture capital program focused on inclusion. And so that means really 4 parts in our thesis. One is to invest in underrepresented fund managers. Secondly, to invest in underrepresented small business owners and entrepreneurs. Third is to deploy capital in underserved regions of the state, geographic regions of the state. And fourth is a category that we refer to as climate equity and climate justice transactions. And so those are the kind of the 4 theses that we were trying to help explore and drive more capital into. We're going to do this in really 3 parts. We're going to have something of a fund for underrepresented fund managers. We're going to have a separate allocation for emerging first-time fund managers. And thirdly, we'll have a co-investment fund to deploy capital directly into companies that meet one of those characteristics. And so we're excited to do this. There are some challenges, there are some limitations, both from the US Treasury guidelines, from the SEC requirements, and California's own restrictions that we have to navigate, but we're very confident that we'll get there. Oh, actually, to your second point, which is what are our return expectations, and you know, we don't see our role as to chase top tier returns. I mean, we're not a fiduciary to our pensioners like a CalPERS and CalSTRS, we do expect to target strong returns so we can continue to recycle and deploy more capital to have this be a long-term permanent program. But we also want to measure our impact on each of those inclusivity metrics. And so it's important for us to have that balance going forward.
That's great. Lots of good questions coming in. We're typing answers. Panel is typing answers to some of them as we go. A couple of them I'll try to lift up now. One question relates to how we find businesses, how we get them to prepare, the documentation that they need to submit, the data they have to submit in an ongoing way, compliance and reporting dimensions, and even what's required of them in terms of, are we going to impose, what kind of personal guarantees are we looking for? How are we commingling personal assets and business and credit to the business? Somebody want to take up how variable that will look across programs, how it's getting decided, who needs to do that kind of outreach and support?
Well, I always
Okay.
go for. I'm sorry. I'm
Go ahead,
sorry.
Ray.
I always thought. I firmly believe that our partners, the CDFI community, they do an amazing job with technical assistance. And New York State also has the entrepreneurial assistance centers that we rely on to help with the technical assistance. We all know that one of the challenges that we have with these very small businesses is just getting them to complete the paperwork. All right. I can't tell you how many times I have run across a small business that tells me, well, my accountant has my tax returns and he's on vacation right now. So, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we have to deal with in a positive manner. And I think in New York State, we rely on our entrepreneurial assistance centers, the CDFIs, to help with technical assistance, to help these folks get through the hurdle of completing the application, which is the hardest part. And I think Beth will agree that getting folks to submit the documentation we need to approve a loan is the most difficult part of the process. And so, again, relying on EACs, the Entrepreneurial Assistance Centers, our technical assistance partners, which are some of the CDFIs and credit unions, help us in getting over this hurdle.
Yeah, and I think even before then, I mean, the kind of customer acquisition or marketing or outreach or reaching these businesses, letting them know that these programs are available is going to be hugely critical to the success of these programs. I think there's always assumption, kind of, if you build an attractive financial product, they will come. And we know that is not the case. There is a lot of competition, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of distrust, particularly in underfunded, underinvested communities of financial products in general. And so it does take sustained, targeted outreach through trusted partners and networks in order to let these small business owners know that these tools are available and that they can partake, and they'll get the support that they need to access them. And so, I mean, luckily, we have learned a lot about this throughout the pandemic through these programs like the Rebuilding Fund and New York Forward and others. We've tested everything from radio ads to rural mailers to rural households that don't have broadband access to direct email campaigns, to outreach through SBDCs and EACs and other programs. We have learned a ton about kind of reach, conversion from that outreach, and what are the most effective strategies to educate and reach the small business owners that can benefit. And so I think this gives us an opportunity to continue to test and learn from that. But I think that's going to be a critical part for any program that the state's put in the market.
And this issue really can't be understated, because despite how much money we're getting and how great these programs are designed, as Beth said, if they don't know about the program, if they don't trust it, if they don't know how to access the program, they sit there dormant, right? And part of the problem with a lot of government programs is that they're bureaucratic and they're difficult to navigate. They're hard to find. They're hard to provide all the required reporting and documentation for. And secondly, they're often inconsistent. They come and go. And so they don't have time to develop a track record of trust within communities where people know to be able to rely on a government funded program. And so those are things that we're trying to address. The other problem is, we as a government agency don't have a marketing budget. And so we have to be very clever about how we conduct outreach, how we find the partners that are in the communities that we're trying to serve and that have those trusted relationships already, rather than going out on the big media campaign, right? And so, but this is critical. Without having that reach, without having that visibility and that consistency of service for the duration, it'll be very hard for this to be successful.
And then Brett, just a note on compliance, because I think you brought that up as well. I mean, I think there is, for anybody that's had the pleasure of reading the demographic reporting requirements and the attestations and all of the requirements of these programs, there is a lot of information that the Treasury Department is requiring us to verify and then also to report. It's also the first time that, from what I understand in these kinds of programs, that's going to require transaction level reporting of data back to the Treasury Department through the states. And so it is going to be a lot of information, a lot of data. I think it's really beneficial for the industry to be able to have access to some of that and to learn from that information. But I think the goal for, at least for the programs we're working on, is to make the customer experience for the small business as streamlined and easy as possible, and take and kind of have it through just one centralized either platform, portal, and really the relationship with their lender, and take everything else off, take it off and kind of centralize it as much as possible. But there is going to be a longer list of attestations that the small business borrower will need to sign than would be in a normal loan agreement because of some of those requirements.
And fortunately, they are providing TA funds for such purposes and some admin overhead. And so we will receive $25 million in California. We're working with our governor's office of the Small Business Advocate that has a broad network of technical assistance providers and small business development center providers to small businesses that we're planning to really leverage to help small businesses navigate both the application process and the reporting requirements of participating in this program.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think he's correct. And that's key, that the small business development centers and the EACs are key partners for us to get this done. Because you're right, the government's, our marketing budgets are close to zero. And a lot of it's done word of mouth, phone calls, emails to folks we work with. In New York State, we had our regional offices, and our regional offices are central to our getting the word out, because they're the ones that know all the folks within their respective regions. So we rely on them to get the word out and have webinars and such, and constantly get the word out through webinars and just talking to people and making sure they understand that we're here to help. And so far it's working. We just got to continue with the same process of just help getting the word out as much as we can.
So unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. We have more questions we didn't get through, but we will take note of them and try to respond directly to some of them. Last words, where we go from here, what you're looking forward to, give it to us in 15 seconds or 20. Who would like to add a word? Scott.
Sure. So we are really thrilled about this opportunity. We hope to never see the necessity for an SSBCI 3.0 in the future, but this one-time opportunity we see as a seed investment into creating permanent infrastructure for the small business community. And we want to build things that are long-lasting, that are sustainable, that continue to grow, to demonstrate to the private capital markets that the risk isn't as high as perceived, the default rates will be lower than they expect, and hopefully the need for some of our products will go away as the private capital markets are drawn in more and more to serve this community, because they see it as worth their time and profitable for them. And so to us, that's the mantra of iBank, and we hope to really apply it over the next couple of years through the SSBCI.
Thank you so much, Scott, Beth, Raphael, Caleb, for joining. We will share this event after the recording is posted, and we're happy to have folks reach out to us at our events at urban.org. And we will be filtering some questions and sharing out some resources as well. I know that Rachel has also sent some around, but we'll also be able to link you to the CDFA work as well. Thank you all for joining, and look forward to continuing the dialogue about this important new federal tool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks.